On October 21, 1967, tension in the Mediterranean was palpable. In a fleeting moment, aboard the INS Eilat, a veteran Israeli destroyer, radar operators detected an unexpected signal. The captain ordered urgent maneuvers, but the threat was already imminent. A missile, P-15, launched from a small Egyptian patrol boat, streaked through the air with a deadly glow. Lethal. The impact devastated the ship's starboard superstructure, opening a gaping hole below the waterline, causing flooding and unleashing a hell of water and fire. That vessel, which had survived convoys and submarine attacks, now lay mortally wounded by a seemingly small weapon, capable of altering history. The Eilat, a symbol of the young Israeli Navy, was about to become the first warship sunk in combat by anti-ship missiles, ushering in a new era of warfare at sea. The origin of the Eilat dates back to a destroyer of the Royal Navy, built during the Second World War. It belonged to the Emergency War Program of Britain, which aimed to mass-produce versatile ships, durable and easy to maintain. With its 362 feet of length, 35 feet of beam, and a displacement of around 1,400 tons, standard, it was a workhorse designed to escort convoys, protect aircraft carriers, and engage submarines. Fast and agile, it could exceed 36 knots, while its 4.5-inch guns and anti-aircraft artillery offered formidable defense against any threat. In the final years of the war, it was deployed on critical missions, where its resilience and firepower made a difference. In 1944, Zealous joined the second destroyer flotilla, integrating into forces defending convoys, supplying the Soviet Union. During those months, it faced relentless attacks from Luftwaffe fighters and bombers, attempting to destroy merchant ships, navigating icy waters toward Murmansk. With active radars and trained crews, Zealous fought not only the glacial cold, but also German submarines lurking in the approaches to the Barents Sea. In February 1945, it played a role in one of its most humanitarian feats, rescuing over 500 Norwegian refugees who had been hiding in caves. In May, just 2 days after Germany's surrender, it entered Copenhagen, escorting British cruisers and destroyers to witness the capitulation of the German fleet, a glorious end for a ship born of wartime urgency. After the war, the United Kingdom faced an oversupply of ships in peacetime. Zealous, like many of its class, was decommissioned in 1947 and remained in reserve for years. Across the Mediterranean, a new state sought to consolidate its power. Founded in 1948, surrounded by enemies, and equipped with only a few patrol boats, Israel urgently needed combat-ready warships. In 1955, London agreed to sell Zealous, offering the young Israeli Navy a battle-tested destroyer. It was renamed INS Eilat, painted with new colors and adapted. For its new crew, it became Israel's flagship, both for its capabilities and symbolic value. Its arrival marked a strategic leap, from coastal patrols to open sea operations. Eilat's baptism of fire under the Israeli flag came soon after. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, deployed on the eastern Mediterranean coast, while Israeli paratroopers took positions in the Sinai, Eilat, accompanied by other destroyers, was ordered to intercept the Ibrahim El-Awwal, a destroyer of the Egyptian fleet that had dared to bombard Haifa's refineries. On October 31st, after an exchange of artillery and aircraft intervention, the Ibrahim El-Awwal was damaged and left without steering. Eilat, flying the Israeli flag on its deck, captured the destroyer, which was later repaired and recommissioned as INS Haifa. This success boosted Israel's morale and cemented Eilat as an emblem of strength. However, that victory was merely a prelude to the storm that was approaching. The region, after the Suez Crisis, remained marked by latent tensions. Egypt, humiliated militarily, and backed by Moscow, began a vigorous rearmament. The Soviet Union sent advisors, artillery, T-34 tanks, and MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters, strengthening Egypt's capabilities for the next confrontation. Meanwhile, in Leningrad's shipyards, a weapon emerged that would forever change naval warfare. Komar-class boats, Project 183, barely 25 meters in length, built from plywood. They seemed insignificant. However, on their decks rested two massive containers, housing P-15 Termit missiles with a range of 40 kilometers, active radar guidance, and an explosive warhead of nearly half a ton, capable of sinking large ships from previously unimaginable distances. For Israel, with a flagship destroyer lacking advanced electronic defense systems, the threat was existential. Yet, many Western experts consider them a curiosity rather than a real danger. Tensions erupted again in June 1967. On the 5th, Israeli aviation launched a devastating surprise attack against Egyptian air bases, destroying over 300 aircraft in hours. The Sinai burned under columns of Israeli tanks that overwhelmed defenses, while paratroopers advanced toward the Suez Canal. The conflict, known as the Six-Day War, delivered a crushing defeat to Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In just 1 week, Israel tripled its territory, seizing Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Sinai, and the Golan Heights. For the Egyptian Navy, the blow was humiliating. Many of its ships were destroyed in port, unable to counter air bombardments. Eilat conducted extensive patrols across the eastern Mediterranean, projecting power as never before in its history, and extending Israel's presence too. The gates of Port Said, on July 11, 1967, barely a month after the war, Eilat intercepted 2 Egyptian patrol boats navigating near the coast. With the crew on high alert, gunners opened fire and reduced the small vessels to floating debris. No Egyptian crew survived. That action, though tactically minor, carried immense symbolic weight. Israel demonstrated that it would not tolerate limits to its maritime expansion and was ready to impose control, even in waters close to Egypt. The incident was received as an affront, intolerable, a reminder of the recent defeat, and a sign that the enemy was operating with impunity at Egypt's very doorstep. The humiliation struck deep in Egyptian public opinion and fueled the desire for revenge. For the Soviets, it was an opportunity to test in real combat the weapons they had supplied to their ally. On October 21st, 1967, the day of vengeance arrived. In Port Said, 2 Egyptian Komar boats awaited their moment. Eilat sailed about 14 miles from the coast, on what seemed a routine patrol. As dusk fell, one of the boat's radars locked onto the destroyer's silhouette. With a deafening roar, a P-15 missile emerged from its container, soaring into the sky, leaving a greenish trail behind. Eilat's lookouts had mere seconds to react. The captain ordered full speed, and a hard turn to reduce the target profile. But it was futile. The missile struck the starboard boiler room. The explosion, knocking out generators, cutting all power, and sparking uncontrollable fires. The ship was crippled, but still afloat, while the crew struggled to save it. Another flash streaked across the sky. A second missile hit, destroying the funnel and causing the hull to groan. With Eilat in flames and its hull weakened, the crew fought desperately against the fire. They improvised rafts and attempted radio distress calls, but communications were down. The captain ordered preparations to abandon ship, aware that surviving another hit would be impossible. An hour later, as the destroyer lay dying, a third missile was launched from the Komar boat. The projectile slammed into the stern, causing catastrophic flooding. Minutes later, a fourth missile exploded nearby, delivering the final blow. The ship broke apart and began sinking slowly, surrounded by columns of smoke and flame. Wounded sailors leapt into the sea or clung to floating debris. In the darkness, survivors watched as their ship, the pride of the Israeli Navy, vanished beneath the Mediterranean waves. Of the 199 crew members, 47 perished, and over 90 were injured. The naval world had changed forever. News of Eilat's sinking spread like wildfire. Israel, which weeks earlier had celebrated a stunning victory in the Six-Day War, faced an unexpected naval defeat. In Cairo, crowds took to the streets, hailing the port-said sailors as heroes. For the first time, a destroyer had been sunk in combat by missiles, marking the birth of a new era. Israel responded with fury. 67 hours later, heavy artillery and mortars razed Egyptian oil facilities, destroying refineries that produced most of Egypt's domestic fuel. The retaliation did not stop there. The episode triggered a conflict soon known as the War of Attrition, an endless chain of attacks and counterattacks along the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean. For Israel, Eilat's loss was a double blow militarily, because its flagship had been destroyed in waters considered safe, revealing vulnerability to weapons previously underestimated, and psychologically, as the myth of invincibility forged in June was shattered in October. The government faced public pressure, demanding revenge, while simultaneously confronting the reality that its fleet lacked defenses against modern missiles. That dark night off port said, forced a complete rethinking of naval doctrines. Veteran destroyers and heavy guns were no longer enough. Investment in more powerful radars, electronic warfare systems, and evasive tactics became essential. In Tel Aviv, admirals realized the future of naval warfare had changed forever. The impact was immediate beyond the Middle East. In Washington, the Pentagon held emergency meetings. Naval intelligence had warned of the P-15 threat, but Eilat's destruction was undeniable proof of its reality. In London, the Royal Navy shuddered at the realization that one of its former destroyers had been reduced to scrap in minutes. Engineers began redesigning frigates and destroyers with absolute priority on electronic countermeasures, deception systems, and rapid-fire artillery capable of shooting down missiles. Western naval doctrine entered a race against time to create a shield strong enough to survive in an ocean where a small boat could sink a giant with just a few shots. Initial solutions were makeshift. Chaff launchers were installed to jam enemy radars, flares to divert sensors, and electronic jamming systems. But these were mere patches against an evolving enemy. The Soviet Union began exporting Komar boats and their OSA-class successors to dozens of allied nations, Syria, India, and others, deploying fleets of small, heavily armed vessels equipped with devastating missiles. The strategy of striking first from afar threatened to upend decades of supremacy based on battleships and heavy destroyers. Eilat's lesson became a mandatory case study in naval academies. It was no longer about who had the largest ship, but who could detect, fire, and survive in the first seconds of an attack. In Israel, the trauma became a catalyst for innovation. naval engineers began developing an entirely new class of vessels. Small, fast, and equipped with their own missiles. Thus, the SIR class. Corvettes were born, replacing heavy destroyers in a sea dominated by rapid, lethal threats. Every lesson from Eilat's disaster was incorporated. Low profiles to reduce. Radar cross-sections, more sensitive radars. Electronic countermeasures, and Gabriel missiles, designed to counter Soviet threats. Over time, these new vessels proved their worth in the Yom Kippur War. In 1973, when Israeli and Syrian boats fought the first naval battles involving missiles in history. But all this strategic change stemmed from a single moment, the October evening when Eilat sank off port said. Eilat's sinking not only triggered an immediate military response, but also ushered in a new era in global strategy. The war of attrition, lasting until 1970, was marked by intense fighting along the Suez Canal, constant air raids, and relentless artillery exchanges. The Mediterranean became a chessboard of shadows, with submarines, missile boats, and frigates playing a deadly game. For Israel, every patrol was a reminder of the cost of error. For Egypt, every missile was a symbol of national resistance. The conflict dragged on without decisive victories, exhausting both sides to the point of collapse. It solidified the idea that the Middle East had become a laboratory for modern warfare, where the weapons of the future were already in use. The naval doctrine of large ships dominating the seas began to crumble. Eilat, a 1944 destroyer, had been designed for battles with cannons and torpedoes, not to survive supersonic missiles guided by radar. Its destruction confirmed that naval supremacy was no longer measured by a ship size, but by the technology protecting it and the weapons it could deploy. In military academies in the United States, Europe, and beyond, the lesson was studied repeatedly. The era of battleships and heavy destroyers was coming to an end. Instead, navies prepared for a future of swarms of fast vessels, mobile platforms, and defensive systems capable of reacting in seconds. The Mediterranean had been the stage for this historic shift. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union capitalized on the propaganda, presenting Eilat's sinking as irrefutable proof of their weapons' effectiveness and the vulnerability of Western navies. Because missiles were exported en masse, accompanied by advisors teaching allies how to use them with precision. Every Moscow Allied port became a fortress, where seemingly fragile boats could become giant killers. The strategic balance tipped, albeit temporarily, toward those who could afford these inexpensive vessels. In response, NATO reacted urgently, launching programs like the American Harpoon and French Exocet. Within years, these became protagonists in naval battles from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf. Eilat's echo reverberated far beyond the Mediterranean. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, Israel debuted its SIR boats and Gabriel missiles against Syrian and Egyptian missile boats. These were the first naval battles involving missiles, thanks to modern radars and electronic countermeasures developed after Eilat's disaster. Israel neutralized dozens of enemy missiles without significant naval losses, proving it had learned its lesson and transformed defeat into innovation. Eilat's fall, far from being the end, became the starting point for a tactical revolution, ultimately granting Israel naval supremacy in the region for decades to come. In the West, the response was equally transformative. The United States accelerated development of defense systems, like the Phalanx CIWS. In the 1970s, designed to fire thousands of rounds per minute against incoming missiles. The Royal Navy adapted its designs to incorporate advanced radars, low-profile hulls, and decoy launchers. Even smaller powers began investing in missile-armed corvettes and frigates, aware that the era of armored giants had ended. Naval exercises in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans now included missile attack simulations, and every commander knew the difference between survival and destruction could be decided in seconds. Eilat's sinking had redefined the sea as the battlefield of the future. October 21st, 1967, became a turning point in naval history. The Eilat, born as HMS Zealous in British shipyards and forged in the storms of the Second World War, met its fate not in a duel of cannons, but under the fire of missiles heralding a new paradigm. Its destruction was both tragedy and revelation. Tragedy for the lives lost on its burning decks. Revelation because it made clear that naval power no longer lay in the mass of steel, but in electronics, sensors, and reaction speed. From that day, no admiral saw the sea the same way. The Mediterranean had witnessed not only a ship sinking, but the birth of an era, the era of missile-driven warfare.